Okay, hello everyone. Welcome. Great. We'll just wait for a few more people. We had around 115 people registered for today, so I might wait maybe just one more minute to see if anyone else joins. Okay, we can just get started then, and then anyone else can just join us when they make it in. Welcome everyone to the second webinar in our three-part series looking at occupational segregation. My name's Kelsey Smith. I'm the head of Equally Safe at Work at Close the Gap, and I'll be introducing our speakers today. I'll give a bit of a brief introduction to the topic today, and then facilitating the Q&A. So thanks everyone for joining us for the second webinar. And so, as we sort of discussed in the previous one, tackling occupational segregation is key to our work at Close the Gap, as it is one of the drivers of the gender pay gap. And we know that it's not well understood by policymakers, employers, and others working on women's employment. And so that's why we wanted to focus in on this issue and spend time over 3 webinars looking at what it is, what the causes are, and what can be done to actually address it. And so our last session was looking at what is occupational segregation. And so we heard from our executive director at Close the Gap. We also heard from Equate and Gender Friendly Scotland on the different causes of occupational segregation. So we were looking at the lack of access to flexible working, women's disproportionate responsibility for unpaid care, lack of progression opportunities for women, especially within the STEM sector, and also how gender norms and stereotypes that start early on in life can follow girls and boys and young men and young women up through school, into college and university, and different training, and then also ultimately into the workplace. And so this session today, we'll be looking in detail at how workplaces have increased the number of women working in male-dominated roles or sectors. And so women are often clustered into jobs that are seen as women's work. So this is horizontal segregation. And these roles are lower paid, have less access to development or progression opportunities, and are seen as less valuable in the economy. And so the undervaluing of women's work contributes to women's higher levels of poverty. So 2/3 of workers earning below the real living wage are women. And women's poverty is linked to children's poverty. And we'll be hearing more about undervaluation in detail at our next webinar in May. And so this all reinforces assumptions that women and men are better suited to particular types of roles. So thinking things like nursing, teaching, IT work, or joiners. And this has changed over time. The first computer programmers were actually women, and they were just seen as naturally better at computer programming until it was decided that writing code was quite difficult. So then they started to train up men in the workforce to do this. And when we have this segregation across roles and sectors, it means that when women and men enter male or female dominated spaces, they don't think it's for them, or they might not have the right support, the right equipment to do the job, the right PPE, or a culture that keeps them in post. We've heard from women working in recycling depots that they only had access to men's work boots that didn't fit, or we've heard from different examples of women's toilets not having seats on them, or people not even knowing where the keys are to the women's toilet because they haven't been used before. And so when you increase the representation of women and men into male or female dominated workspaces, it can lead to better decision making, hearing from different views or perspectives, and better representing the community you serve. And it means that people aren't constrained from choosing to work in a particular industry or sector. So what can we do about this? It means looking at recruitment, reviewing workplace culture, offering flexible working, looking at development and progression opportunities. And so this is where our speakers come in today to talk about this more and provide really practical examples of how this has happened in their workplaces. So we'll be hearing from Sarah Turkington from Scotrail on their work to increase the number of women as train drivers. And then we'll be hearing from Gareth Hind at First Bus on their work to bring in more women as bus drivers. So just a few housekeeping notes. Live captioning has been enabled for the event. So to access this, you can click the three dots or more button at the top of your screen, then language and speech, then live captioning. We'll also be recording the session today and sharing a link on our YouTube afterwards. So we did that with our last session as well. So you'll be able to find all 3 recorded webinars at the end of May. And so we'll be hearing from our speakers, and then if you can save your questions in the end, we'll do a Q&A at the end. So you can use the Q&A button at the end of the session. We'll be monitoring the questions as they come in. So I will then now hand over to our first speaker, Sarah Turkington, who is the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager at Scotrail.
Hi, hello everyone. Can you hear me okay? Is there a bit of an echo? No, it must just be myself and my computer, Kelsey, because I've listened to you do a fab introduction, but I heard it twice, and I can now hear myself speaking twice. So I'm going to continue the very best I can with the allocation of time that I have, but hopefully I will not annoy myself with this echo. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Turkington. As Kelsey has said, I am the Scotrail Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Manager. I've been here at Scotrail for just under 3 years. Prior to that, working in the college sector in an EDI role. So making the transition to Scotrail has been an interesting time, given that the college sector, as you would imagine, is very different to transport and therefore has its different challenges. And almost certainly in terms of the number of men to women within the transport sector in comparison to the college sector, there are clear differences. And much of that has been a focus of my work and the wider HR directorate in terms of really trying to understand why might that be and what can we do about it and what will the impact of that be in terms of diversifying our workforce most principally, but also thinking ahead to the gender pay gap as well. How will we see when we diversify our workforce, what does that mean in terms of other obligations that we have? So I'd like to keep things conversational. I do appreciate there's a Q&A later, but if anyone does have any points or things to think, ask me, please either, if we're able to, do it during this or at the Q&A. As I said, I'm going to keep things fairly conversational and just kind of talk through where we've been, I would say, in terms of our numbers, but also the types of events that we have began to do to really see a difference in terms of our workforce and real encouragement to see more women come into the particular role of train driving. So I do have a couple of slides. So whilst I've said it's going to be conversational, I'm just going to use the slides as something to share with you. But in addition to that, I've been a little bit cheeky. The slides that I'm going to share are some of the slides that we use for our train driver events, really just to give you a flavour of what we did through those events and so on. So all being well, I should be able to share my slides now. They'll have a bit of an echo as well, which is not great. Hopefully everyone is going to be able to see these. Thumbs up, thank you. That was Colette, thank you for that. So as I was saying, I've been a little bit cheeky. So I have some of the slides here that we use for our events. For those who are unfamiliar with the events that we've had most recently, we've had 4 women into Scotrail train driver career events. 2 of those were in-person events, and then 2 of those were online ones. Really, it was something quite new for us. in the sense that we had a real focus on not only women, but train driving in particular. And that came from the opportunity really that we foresee ahead of us. And I'll speak more on that just shortly. But the events that we had, as I said, some were in person and some were online. And much of that was around really, first of all, beginning to see, was there appetite, was there a demand from women in particular to understand what the role required, but in addition to that, really coming into Scotrail as an organisation, and a key organisation, I would say, within Scotland. So just reflecting on that, we had kind of clear objectives as to why we were doing the event. Technology is failing me today. Slide's not moving on. Just stop sharing for a minute. Someone just give me a thumbs up if you can see that okay. Perfect, thank you. So as I was saying, so we had 4 events very much focused on encouraging women to come into our workforce, but in the train driver role in particular. That really played into who we want to be as a business and an organisation. So perhaps this is something that's already clear, but we wanted to diversify and make sure our workforce was reflective of the communities in which we were serving. Some of you will know as well that Scotrail moved into public ownership, and as a result of that, the public sector equality duty now applies to us. So really our commitment was being underlined by that legal duty, but going further in that in terms of really understanding who we were as an organisation. In terms of the public sector equality duty, our very first outcomes were only last year. So we set for the first time 4 equality outcomes. And one of those outcomes is really focused on diversifying the workforce. So from that understanding, we could see already that we had a high number of men within our business. And then when we began to look at roles in particular, such as the train driver grade, we could see that that was a real disparity when it came to men and women. So even just reflecting on that, when I think of the overall number, so we have about, well, at that time we had about 22% were women. That was our total workforce. So we had then real challenges when we began to look at our particular roles. And again, perhaps not a surprise to some of you, but really reflecting on roles that have traditionally been seen as quite male orientated or male dominated. And some of that was then being reflected in what we were able to offer women who had, say, parental responsibilities. How could we make that work in terms of our workforce as well? So whilst we had that real strategic commitment, and as I said, through our equality outcomes, in terms of diversifying our workforce, we are then trying to balance that up with the real operational demands that we have within our business and what we're able to do. So through time, obviously, we began to really think about our policies and flexible working and those incremental or fundamental things that could make a difference to people's experiences. But reflecting on the train driver role in particular, what we also saw was the opportunity. So again, you may have seen some kind of real coverage around Scotrail that we're trying to recruit 160 drivers over the next 4 years. So for us, we began to really understand if we could begin to encourage more women to think about that role in particular, we had a real opportunity to begin to change the demographic of our workforce. Because these are new internal starts. So whilst we do see progression routes within our business, really how we're going to change the dial in terms of encouraging more women to come in is through those pathways. So that was the opportunity for us. And through the events that we've had, as I said, we've had 4 events already. But what we began to see through them is that our numbers are increasing. So not only are we increasing year on year in terms of the number of women coming in, not only to the business, but into that driver role in particular, the events that we've had have given us that real focus of how we can track better from having an interest, moving to application, then moving from application to interview and so on. And whilst I'm not going to share some of that data with you right now, it's really given us a more improved or enhanced insight to understand how impactful these events are. But in a very simple way, what I would say is the demand was there. So when I reflect on the online events that we had over 2,000 people sign up for those events. So whilst we're not totally seeing it just yet in terms of our demographics, what we are beginning to see is the interest is there, or the demand is there to understand the role. So from that, we can build upon it. So as I was saying, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen now. Thinking about the events that we had, as I said, the online events, we were able to draw about 2,000 people to join us. We had the sign up there. And through the event, what we were able to do, just in terms of the practical logistics of it, is we had a group of different types of colleagues from across the business speak about not only the train driver experience, but we also had colleagues from training speak about what their requirements would be. We also reflected on an HR perspective, where were our policies, what did it look like to come into the business? And I would say if it's something that you're thinking about doing, having that mixed group of different colleagues speak about their aspects of the business was hugely important. The online that we did was slightly different to what we were able to do in person. The online events, by their very nature, are much more directive, and whilst we did have a Q&A, it's a very, it's not easy perhaps to speak at a Q&A, especially with that amount of people on the call as well. But the online was much more directive in terms of its delivery. But what we were able to do through the in-person events was extend the time. So again, if it's something that you're thinking about doing. So the event was about 2 hours or thereabouts in person. We held it here at our headquarters in Scotrail. Again, there was pros and cons of that in terms of women in particular, but we thought about timings as well. So we had them later on in the afternoon and an evening session to increase engagement and participation. And through the online events, through the in-person events, what we were able to do is show participants our actual setup. And that was hugely valuable as well. So before I started working at Scotrail, I had no clue how you actually drove a train. Perhaps you do too. I thought it would have a steering wheel. Turns out it doesn't. It's just the pushing of a button. But what we were able to do through our in-person events is move some of the women to our simulator to actually demonstrate what the role would require, and also the training period too. In addition to that, we ran carousel activities at our in-person event, where we had current drivers speak about their experiences, but we also had some colleagues who had progressed in terms of the grade. So we had driver team managers, we had driver instructors, really just to give that real flavour that whilst you may come in to do a particular role within the business, there are much more bigger opportunities, wider opportunities on there. And again, being very clear that how will that have an impact for us, very selfishly, in terms of our demographic, helps to keep people or retain people within the business. So that's where we were kind of at. Just to kind of summarise, I probably have spoken for less of my time, not sure if I have, Kelsey, but just to kind of summarise, for us, it came for a real purpose, and that we wanted to encourage people to think about coming into our business, in particular women, because we identified overall that we have much greater numbers of men. When we looked at the train driver grade in particular, we're sitting about 90% men. And even though we have seen that incrementally improve year on year, what we have now is the opportunity through the recruitment of 160 new drivers every year for the next 4 years. Now, whilst I appreciate not every organisation and business will have that same opportunity, what it has really meant for us is that we can begin to diversify in the way that we're seeking to do with this particular role, because we're naturally going to be bringing people in and have an injection. And that's really where those female career events came into play, the 4 that I just described, because they were new where they were externals, and the opportunity really to say, this is what we can offer, not only as an organisation, but give some real first-hand experience from those who were at those events, and have that simulator experience also to have a real understanding of what it means to be a train driver. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. I think that was really interesting what you're saying around that sort of opportunity you had with that 160 staff, that I guess identifying an area in your organization where you can realistically change the makeup and actually do a targeted approach to see if that works and if you can influence those numbers. So thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions that I'll ask you at the end, but I'm interested in hearing a little bit more about what you've done. So next we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Gareth Hind, who's the Director of Colleague Experience and Internal Communications at First Bus. And we'll be having more of a sort of similar to what you're saying, Sarah, but we'll have more of a conversation style. So I'll just have a few questions that I ask Gareth, unless you wanted to do a bit of an introduction of yourself first.
I can do. Hey, and Sarah, thank you very much. Great to follow you. And Kelsey, hello there. Hello, folks. Gareth Hind, as Kelsey said, Director of Colleague Experience and Internal Comms at First Bus. Been with the business just over 4 years now, and having bags of fun. So yeah, we're doing some really interesting stuff, and it's really starting to translate through into business performance too. So yeah, really happy to talk to you today. And yeah, Kelsey, I think you're interviewing me. That's the style we're going with, isn't it? Or conversational? Should we say conversational? Yes.
Yeah, more about asking some questions. So yes, the reason why we approached First Bus was because we had heard a bit of the work that you were doing on gender equality and increasing the number of women in your workforce. So could you give us a bit of background on why First Bus decided to start doing targeted work on gender equality, and what was some of the gender breakdown in your staff before you started that work?
Sure. I mean, look, I think we recognise that inclusive businesses are stronger businesses. So, there's a position we have that we want to follow through on, which is, how do we become a more inclusive business? And a more inclusive business will lead to a more diverse business. And I think for me, it has to come in that order. I'm a retailer at heart. I spent most of my career in retail before I moved into transport. I ran shops, big shops, square shops, round shops, lots of shops. And we often talked about the shop, the shop window. And I think if you have a shop window that is full of women, but when you go on the shelves, it's full of men, then actually, you're peddling a lie, and you will get caught out, and you will see the rookie turnover, the turnover in the really early days of employment be really high, because actually you're suggesting a culture that doesn't exist. So for me, you've got to solve the inclusion and that belonging, that sense of being part of something in the organization, in the business, and then diversity will follow. And sometimes you've got to go hold your nerve with that, Kelsey, because there's a bit of a lag, and you've got to hold your nerve with it, but it will happen. And we've started to see that coming good. So I checked this morning, our gender ratio, we have 12.7% women in our business. So that's just over 1,700 women in real terms. That's double what it was 5 years ago. And hopefully we'll double it again in the next 5 years. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to sit here and say, yes, we've got, we're going to triple it, and so on and so on. But this is a long game, that we are a very traditional industry, a very traditional business. And it's really interesting actually hearing from Sarah that, they're a very similar industry in transport, very traditional industry, very male dominated, and arguably at times an industry that is designed for men. And so you've got to unpick some of that stuff before you can expect to see a return in terms of ratios. But yeah, really pleased to say doubled in the last 5 years, and we've got pretty ambitious plans to go again in the next 5.
Yeah, and I think that point on you can increase the number of staff you're recruiting, but also you want to make sure that they stay in post and stay within the organization, because that's also what you want to do. And so as you were saying about sort of unpicking some of those sort of, gender stereotypes or whatnot in the workplace. You consulted with staff. I'm read in one of the articles you wrote about their experience and specifically around sort of gender equality in the workplace. And so what was your approach in speaking to those staff groups, and what were they saying? And then also, what did you do with those responses?
That's a cracking question. We've got a couple of hours for this, right? Listening is really, really important because you can start to speculate on what you might need to do, but in reality, if it's not going to stick or make a difference, you're wasting your energy. So calling in data that we have available to us, our engagement survey is a fantastic opportunity. We ask demographic information within that, so we understand the difference between what our men are saying and what our women are saying. The sentiment, the emotional sentiment behind that too is really important. So we kind of take that as a stream, but then talking to colleagues, Kelsey, is the very best way. I love going into depots and saying, right, what can we do to make this a more inclusive place? We've got networks, we've got the Balance Network, very purposely called because I think this is about balance. It can't be, in a male-dominated environment, it can't be anti-male because we simply won't make progress. Because whether we like it or not, in a business like ours, in many businesses that we're trying to improve the gender equality, men hold the balance of power and hold the balance of experience, and that's because that's what's been afforded to them because of societal and so on and so on. So we can't be anti-men. It's about bringing men with us, and so Balance is a really powerful network of women and men that are trying to work hard to improve the gender equality in our business, and they provide us with so much rich information. And they were telling us things like, it's not right that the challenges around period poverty aren't right. We should do something about that in our business. So we became the first period positive workplace as a national operator, and to say, look, we're listening. We want to do this. We heard that there are barriers in our industry around some of the benefits that are available. So we listened really hard, and just last month we introduced paid IVF treatment leave for women that are having IVF treatment. They now get 5 days per treatment paid leave, but their partner also gets 2 days, because we shouldn't be equally balanced. We shouldn't be asking people to take holiday for this really important moment in supporting their partner through this treatment. So listening is really, really important. We also partner with some of the industry, the experts. So we've just partnered on a huge survey with Women in Transport and Women in Bus and Coach around International Women's Day, which has been a real across industry research piece that helps us inform what we're doing, and helps us play back that this is working, this isn't. So that's been really, really powerful. But listening is so important. There's another great example. We've just done introduced last year, a new uniform. And we met with many protected characteristic groups to understand what's really important for them in this uniform and make sure they're represented. And I remember being in a conversation with some women and said, you know what, Gareth, what's really important is you get the buttons the right way round. And I what do you mean we get the buttons the right way round? Well, if we have a standard polo shirt like we do at the moment, every bus driver sits in the same position and it gapes. So actually it gapes, and it's just not right that when customers get onto the bus, actually that there's a gape. Can we not have the button the other way around? I was like, well, yeah, of course we can have the button the other way around. Now, I would have no idea about that. And this was a real kind of doink moment for me, that we've got to get to the people that really matter, that have lived experience, that understand the opportunity, and they help us shape. But what we can do as an organisation is play that back in a really positive way and say that we are listening, and proof points are really, really important, so that they can not only feel heard, they are heard, and we make a better business for it. So there's a few examples in there.
Great, thanks. And I think this is sort of related onto that, about sort of listening to staff and their needs. And we know that access to flexible working, I think Sarah had mentioned that as well, is key for supporting women into the workplace. So what have you done around increasing access to flexible working, and any sort of challenges or opportunities you've found? Because I think this happens quite a bit within operational roles, is balancing that work-life balance and service need.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this is really hard. So let's get that out there. This is really, really tricky. And the reality is, if we could have solved this by now, we would have. But you know, we as a business recognise the opportunity here, but also recognise how difficult it is to make this sustained change. So we've done a couple of pilots, we've done a couple of trials to understand the impact, and actually it had really positive results for everybody. And there were some really nice examples where folks said, actually, for the first time, I've been able to go and pick my child up from nursery, but I've not been able to do that because I'm now working in a more flexible manner, which is fantastic. We did see a slight dip in productivity because of it. And so it's interesting, there's a cost sometimes that you've got to ratify to working flexibly, and that we're working through and understanding more on that. But it's back to that, as an organisation, we are wired in the way that we are. So any change, it takes time, and you've got to unpick stuff. You know, our scheduling agreements with our unions are written in a way that doesn't necessarily favour flexible working in certain circumstances. The way we train our people can often be on a full-time basis. We're not built to train people part-time. So whilst we can hire people part-time, we then have a real sticking point on how we recruit. So we've got to work on that, on how we train. So we've got to work on that as well. But this is the golden thread. If we get this right, the positive implications are huge, but it's really tricky. And you know, is a multi-directorate change for our business, but also in the industry. We did a trial of recruiting or advertising part-time roles, and interestingly, what we got was a load of male Uber drivers that applied for the role. Because it really suited them. What we didn't see was a significant number of females applying, and that made us kind of step back a little bit and seek to understand what was playing out here, because what we thought was going to have a really positive effect in terms of applicants, you know, it didn't. So we're unpicking that and understanding. So a lot of this is about being curious and trying stuff and being brave to try it. And sometimes, great, you get a really positive outcome. Sometimes, actually, you're sort of like, okay, well, what went on there? One of the biggest differences we've seen is the brilliant work that the recruitment team are doing in First Bus around inclusive hiring, inclusive training, how we make sure that in our adverts and our recruitment campaigns that women are showing up in them and being present, because you know what we hear a lot of is I want to be able to see. And it's back to that shop front. I want to be able to see that I can work in this organisation. And actually, what Sarah was saying really resonated with me. That, you know, the campaign, the some of the imagery that you showed there really worked for me. That actually, I you can see that showing up. So I think, I think we've got a lot of work to do in the flexible space. It's a huge opportunity, but it's also a huge challenge. But we're not scared of that. We're not afraid to go after it. It's finding the right way at the right time for that to work, and to not jeopardise on the performance of the business in doing so.
And do you regularly consult with staff about their sort of access to flexible working, and if they feel supported to undertake flexible working, or how do you monitor that?
And not as much as I think we need to, because we don't really have a solution to it yet. So we hear it regularly, but also we're not ready yet to go out and solve it. So so I think we hear it, we see it, we're getting less around it. So in our engagement survey, the number of so that the sentiment around work-life balance, the sentiment around flexible working or part-time opportunities is starting to reduce in volume, which is an indicator that we're starting to make a move in the right way. But yeah, there's definitely opportunity, Kelsey. There's more to do in this space for sure.
Great. And you'd mentioned this a bit around recruitment, but in terms of sort of targeted recruitment and some of the work that your team has done around, yes, inclusive recruitment. But can you speak further about any approaches that you've taken to specifically target women or sort of support them into coming into the workplace?
Yeah, so in addition to what I already said around the imagery, the campaign, that side of it, we've done quite a lot internally. So we had a female allyship program, which was a really strong positive action program to help develop talent within the business, but targeting at female. That had some real success, and we went to see some really positive stories that came from that as women went on to next level jobs, or actually, and this was a really interesting nugget. Somebody said, I don't want to be promoted. I just want to be the best I can be in the role I'm in. And so actually we saw some horizontal moves as well, which was, we kind of had to step back and go, are we measuring the wrong stuff here? Because we were measuring progression. But maybe that's not what we should be measuring as a success metric for this program. We've had a really positive campaign around reverse mentoring, and I was reverse mentored by a lady in one of our businesses, and it was eye-opening. And we had senior leadership across the business, male senior leadership, reverse mentored by women, and that was hugely beneficial. And I would recommend reverse mentoring across all demographics. I think it's a really useful way to start to address the blind spots that exist. They are there. And I think it's a really interesting way to do that. But anything that provides positive action, whether it be CV writing workshops or interview skills, we've just done a program called presentation skills, and it's a masterclass style kind of Toastmaster, if you've heard of that, Toastmaster style opportunity to just practice and build confidence, because we often hear that confidence, that imposter syndrome exists, and it's real, and it's a thing. So how can we help overcome it? So actually, when our women go for a promotion or go for an interview, they can be their very best versions of themselves in that. Now, of course, the interview is the interview, and the success has to be based on the performance of that interview. But we can help people be at the best as they go into that. So I think, yeah, lots of stuff there as sort of ideas on what we're doing. But the reverse mentoring is really, really powerful. One I'd highly recommend.
Yeah, that's all really interesting. And so I'm just wondering, because one of the examples we suggest in some of our work around recruitment is also around doing those sort of CV or pre-application workshops or pre-interview workshops. And so does First Bus offer that as well?
So for internal, we do the programs that we've just talked about, but I think we're also doing some really interesting outreach within the communities where we operate to help folk that like NEET, for example, that come in and get that support. And whilst we're not targeting those necessarily at women, it's an open program, and naturally the ripple effect of that is really powerful. So yeah, but internally, I've run a couple of workshops as part of the allyship program, which were really powerful for me and for the folk that just start to give some practice and skill build and confidence build in what does a good CV look like. As a hiring manager, I can give my view on what do I look for, what's really important to me when I get a CV, and those interview skills. Interviewing is a technique. I don't think you are necessarily born as a great interviewee. I think you can teach it, you can learn it, you can train it. And sometimes if you've not applied for a role for many years, you're kind of out of practice. And whilst muscle memory is there, yeah, you want a bit of support with it. So again, I think, you know, that mentoring relationship is really strong, and a real opportunity.
Great. I think I'll stop there and we can open it up to questions from other people because I've seen a couple come in from Sarah as well. But thanks very much, Gareth. I think it's interesting hearing about all the different approaches and sort of looking at it through sort of different areas of the organization. And I guess one of the key things is also hearing about the importance of collecting both that qualitative data, so speaking to staff, knowing what their experience is, as you said, trying to find what your blind spots are, but then also that quantitative bit about how do we continue to collect data on what's happening in the organization, so we can make improvements. So thank you so much. I'll see some of the questions that have come in so far. I think there's a few initially for you, Sarah, so we can go to those first. So the first one we have is there a minimum age for trained drivers and how long does the training take? And what qualifications does someone need to become a driver?
Thank you. Just to apologise, again, I still have a bit of an echo, so I am hearing some of the conversation, but hopefully you can hear and see me.
Yes, yeah.
So in terms of a minimum age requirement for drivers, yes, there is one that's it's not set by Scotrail, it is a regulatory requirement. So you may have seen recently there's talk that it'll move further down. So at the moment in time, it's 20 years of age. And in terms of how long did the training take, it can take up to 18 months. Some of that will depend on how things are doing operationally, of where we can fit people in terms of routes they may then be driving on. But it can take about 18 months to do. So some of that is based within Atrium, which is our headquarters here in Glasgow. So some kind of face-to-face learning and then moving on to route learning. And then in terms of qualifications, I guess that really is the beauty of this particular role. There's no set qualification. It's really why we are promoting this grade in particular as well, to encourage more women to think about in terms of opportunity. We're really trying to emphasize the skills. Thinking about skills such as time management, as you would imagine, that would be very important to make sure times are on train and perform to their times. So those kind of skills we really have emphasized, and that's something that we did through those events also, really trying to understand that if you have the skills that we require, then you are the very people looking forward to come into the workforce for that particular grade. That's widening opportunity as well.
Great. I think unfortunately your microphone was cutting out a little bit there, but hopefully everybody was able to pick up on that. I don't know if there's anything we can do to support your echo here, but I've got another question that I think would apply to both speakers, which is what support is available for women who come into these roles and continue to be faced with sometimes enduring masculine or macho culture? Sarah, do you want to come first?
Oh, that's a big question. It's very much what I've spoken about so far is about how do we attract women into our business? How do we encourage people to take that opportunity? And I think you mentioned it earlier of then how do we retain women within our business? And that depends on different grades and opportunities within them, I would say. In terms of kind of facing those perhaps traditional or masculine attitudes, if that's what the question is focused on, then ultimately through the business, we are trying to encourage all colleagues to have an increased awareness around EDI. And certainly in terms of just focusing on recruitment again, if I can, one of the key things that we've done for line managers and hiring managers across the business is that nearly all have now gone inclusive training in terms of recruitment in particular. So whilst that may not affect kind of day to day in terms of the bothy, we would hope there would be some impact in terms of that. But really, if we drill down, when we have those line managers and hiring managers have an increased awareness of what it means to be inclusive, to do that at that very, very early stage, then we have a much better opportunity of encouraging women in the business, but also to stay knowing that that has been their experience within it. Understandably, well, not understandably, we will continue to have those types of challenges, given the workforce that we have also, that once people are here, they stay. So how are we able to tackle those types of attitudes? But ultimately, that's a kind of focus of ours through the types of activities that we're doing, not just through recruitment, but then within the workplace too. So there's a number of activities and events the team do to do that. Employee networks have been huge in that. What I would say, just reflecting on some of what I could hear from Gareth, when you spoke about engagement surveys and sentiments scores, if we look at our most recent engagement surveys for Scotrail, and this reflects back to the point about experience, 70% of our staff say that their gender, their sexual orientation and things like that have not had an impact in terms of their experience. That has moved up 12 percentage points from our last engagement survey. So something's working within the business. Beyond that, we had 81% of staff also say that they can be themselves. So whilst we want to continue to build on that, they're a good reflection of where we're at currently, suggested that we are beginning to tackle some attitudes that are getting to a place in which we're seeing increased diversity as well.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Gareth, did you want to respond to that as well?
Sure, and I think Sarah's covered it beautifully. It's all around, for me, the inclusive culture that you create in the organisation, and you know, there's a few tactical things you can do, I think. So having a really clear policy position, but policy is only as good as what is enacted in the business. So I think you also need to have really clear expectations. And I remember 4 years ago, when I joined the business, we put out a note from Jeanette Bell, our MD, that went to every individual in the organisation that laid out really clearly the expectations of them as an individual, and our position on EDI within the organisation. And it was a really clear moment to say, look, actually, we know we've got opportunity in this space, but it starts here. And this is what we expect of you as a colleague in the business, and this is what we'll give you back in doing so. So I think it's a really, you know, how do you set expectation really clearly, and put that at the very top of the organisation, and it's role modeled through. And then I think there's a training. So I think there's building awareness, and we often see, right, that this is about a fear of getting it wrong. It's about a fear of saying the wrong thing, and so actually what we see then is sometimes people don't say anything at all, for fear of getting it wrong. And so actually building awareness and confidence in this conversation is vital. We launched a program called Celebrating Our Differences, and we're on to module 9 now. And it's an opportunity for, and we have our supervisory level and above, so around 1,300 people in the organisation go through this program, and it's really important just building that conversation, creating a safe space to learn and understand and be curious and ask questions. And with that, you also, of course, have the opportunity to set your stall out and be really clear on what is expected of you. But ultimately, it comes back to inclusive culture, creating an environment that's psychologically safe to enable people to be their true selves. And if they come up against something that doesn't feel right or comfortable for them, there's routes to be able to resolve that, and to share that in the right way. That's kind of the upward, and then the downward piece is building a really clear understanding within our leadership teams on what is okay and what isn't. And I think often people know the difference, but sometimes lack the confidence to be able to deal with it. So part of that training was actually, if you see something, what are the techniques around calling it in or calling it out? You know, calling in is the moment, in the moment. Calling it out is actually sometimes, you know, so calling in is you know, taking it offline and having that conversation in in a way that doesn't embarrass people, that doesn't show people up. Calling out is in the moment, and there's a right time to do that. And how do we equip people to do that live in the moment and have that skill to do it? Because I think everybody inherently knows the difference between right and wrong. I think people know that, but what's stopping them doing the right thing then? And get under the skin of that and be curious and then solve that. And actually, yeah, you create an environment where people can say, actually, that wasn't right. And you know, move the culture on.
Great, thank you. Sarah, I had a question for you around work to support women into becoming train drivers. And I wondered if there's any work that Scotrail was doing to support women who were already in post in the organization to sort of move sideways into becoming train drivers. So as we know that often admin workers don't have a lot of opportunity to move into different sort of operational roles within organizations. And is that something that you've maybe looked at in terms of increasing numbers of women as train drivers?
Thanks, Kelsey. I'm going to try pick up with what I heard. Sorry, everyone. In terms of internal movement, if that's the kind of focus of the question, then that's absolutely something that we see. And just to echo the point I made earlier, once people start, they continue to stay. Now, there'll be many reasons for that, but one of the reasons I hope is also reflective of we're doing something good for our people here. In terms of internal movement, we're seeing about 35% are our internal movement within business. Moving to the train driver grade in particular, what we do see is that we have some colleagues who are conductors or ticket examiners making that move. And that's where we actually have fair parity in terms of male to female, keeping it to that binary. So as well as seeing external opportunities to bring in new starts, in terms of then getting to that role and then moving further in the business, we also see it within in terms of that internal movement. And some of that's just reflective of having the opportunity to come into the business first of all, and then move across. When you describe kind of clerical roles, ours is called CR5s, and there's different gradings with that. Yes, there is opportunities to move from what would traditionally perhaps been seen as a clerical role into more operational role. And that's something I forgot to say earlier, probably in a bit of a rush and having this echo, is alongside those events that we did for externals, we also had 2 internal events for people who were internal to the business. Just again, a real reflection of if people did want to make the move, giving them a full opportunity to understand what the role required, and then to make that move if they so choose to do. Just to add further to that, whilst it's not directly related to the train driver grade in particular, we are on our second cohort of the Women's Leadership Programme. So even though we're looking at our data just currently, thinking ahead to our public sector equality report next year, our gender pay gap, we do see movement from conductor and so on to a driver grade. When we look at our management cohort, there is real parity when it comes to senior management. And in fact, the number of women within that grade has improved. So when it comes to women's leadership as an overall, again, we are being quite successful in this space. Let's continue doing that, introduce a women's leadership programme of women who were initially identified as having potential to succeed. That is on its second cohort, as I've said, and that's having some impact in terms of those moving potentially at what's considered as a CEO grade into management and further. What we do see though is really that difference between kind of jobs at HQ and then those real operational, and it's for us, our focus is around those operational because that's where the greater numbers of men are.
Great, thank you. It's always interesting. It's one of the sort of initiatives that we suggest our employers do. My final question for both of you is what are the success rates for getting an interview and then getting a job and desegregated by gender, but also desegregating that by race, and how much of a focus is that for your organization? Gareth, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't share the absolute numbers. I think it's Ricardo that said,
Yeah.
I can't share the absolute numbers, Ricardo, but what I can say is that we've made really huge improvements in our conversion ratios through the recruitment process. And actually now we are at parity with number of applications proportionately are now the number of job offers for women as well. So that bias has reduced, and actually, you know, what we're seeing proportionately is that conversion ratio working through, which is a really positive place to be. And that's come from that effectively from that training that we talked about. And I can see a question from Rachel, which I'll very quickly nod to, around unconscious bias training. So we do inclusive hiring training. I personally don't love the term unconscious bias. I think it's really difficult to be aware of something you're not aware of. I think it's almost like a bit of an oxymoron. It's really hard. I much prefer the term conscious inclusion, and that's what we do. We work with people on how to be consciously inclusive in their practices, and that we're having much more success with almost flipping that narrative. And yeah, so Ricardo, yes, we're seeing much improvement, and that, you know, that's as it should be. There shouldn't be a significantly proportionate difference between conversion ratios for men and women, if everything is working through as it should do. There have been, and we've faced into that, and I'm delighted to say that those ratios are far better than they were.
Great. And Sarah, did you have any final points on success rates for interviews?
Sure, I can't quote the numbers either. What I can reflect on is what we are seeing when we look at our applications. They are still heavily weighted in terms of the numbers of men in comparison to women making applications, and that's for all jobs within the business. So that's why we've really tried to focus on just encouraging opportunities to come into the business. Because when you then drill that down, or as many of you will know already, if the pool is already a higher number of men, then we're not then seeing more women make it through to interview and then into the business. So that's why that's what our focus. So yes, we are looking at our applicant data, we're looking at those conversion rates, and also in terms of those events I described earlier, we are really now trying to understand what impact is being made. So how does that 2,000 for the online events really translate into numbers? But what we can see, if I focus on that trend driver in grade in particular, as I say, incremental change. And when we look at the grade just before, so you would be a trainee driver first before moving on to the grade. What we do see is the number there is improving, and that might be from internal and external. So yes, we are tracking our data when it comes to sex and beyond in terms of the other protected characteristics, trying to be in a better position to understand the intersectionality of that also. Not fully there, but we will get there. They are a big focus for us.
Great. Okay, thank you so much. We're just at our time for the webinar today, so we'll just end it there. And thank you so much to our speakers, Gareth and Sarah, for joining today. And it's been really helpful to hear about the different work that you've been doing in your organization. And we'll be sharing a recording for the event in the next couple of days. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
Thanks, Kelsey. Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Matt.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.